Nat, did you wanted to pass around the guest list again, because some folks had joined us? Okay, well, thanks. All right, well, we're return to the Wildlife Committee meeting, and I'd like to recognize Dave Kostersky from Ducks Unlimited Canada, from the Great Frozen North to the Great Frozen South.
Thank you, Chairman. The frozen north, when I left yesterday, was 10 degrees warmer than the frozen south. So I came down to much cooler temperatures down here. Thanks again for the opportunity. I'll keep this fairly short. I just wanted to give a little update. I appreciate the time always. Director Carter offered me a little bit of time and asked the commission if it would be all right. The partnership with Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency has been incredible since 1968, a long time period. What I'd like to focus on is really this idea that you are contracting us to do conservation work on your waterfowl breeding grounds. You have deer here in the state, you do work with where the deer are raised. Well, your waterfowl, a large chunk of them are raised in Canada. That's your breeding grounds for your waterfowl. And so our partnership, to me, is really about you contracting us to do the best thing with your dollars, leverage them, put them on the ground, make sure they return you waterfowl as often as possible. Now, we don't control the weather, so we can't do much about whether the ducks actually come here at a particular time, whether the water's froze. If you got open water, I hear the hunting's pretty good. But other than that, you know, we just put it into our heart and soul of putting ducks up in the air. I did almost forget. Got to wish Connie a happy birthday. We'll look for free dessert tonight. Free dessert at dinner tonight, right? Moving forward. So, Tennessee is about keeping the ducks flying. We leverage your dollars, we work hard to do it, and it's a collective partnership. First trip that I was a part of in 2004, Commissioner Cox, his first time around on the commission, Skip Symington, Commissioner Symington, and Ron Fox made a trip up to Canada in the spring. Gary Myers strongly supported his staff learning what was going on in the breeding grounds and encouraged these folks to make the trip up. Gary had been to the breeding grounds before on his own and wanted his staff and commission to become aware. This cairn we put up in recognition of TWRA up in Prairie, Canada in the Allen Hills. We had another trip in between, and then we had a trip in 2016, not this past fall, the fall before. As you can see, it was a little bit chillier in the fall at that time. There was snow on the ground at the end of that tour. Large group of commissioners that took an interest in finding out what we do up in Canada with the resources that come from TWRA. I think very highly of the states that take the resources and the time to come see what we're doing. Just like you like to travel around your state and see what your staff are doing here in the state, hear from them, seeing what's going on in the breeding grounds with your significant investment is absolutely critical. To me, I call it a tour of duty. It's your duty to see what your dollars are doing up there. This past year, Tennessee made the commitment to go to their AFWA goal. That's another acronym, the alphabet soup thing. AFWA is the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. That association committed, starting in '91, to states meeting a certain goal of contributions or commitments to conservation on the breeding grounds to meet enough dollars to leverage federal dollars and get the job done up in Canada. Tennessee returned to their AFWA goal. They were there one time before under Director Myers' leadership and are back there again, which is a tremendous achievement. That gets leverage. DU commits to match every dollar the state puts out, and we use that to match NACA. Right now, very favorable exchange. Our dollar's weak, your dollar's strong, so it adds up again. So we're really looking at over 5 to 1. That's just the basic. We have a lot of Canadian dollars that we do. If it happens to be an area with over 50% native existing habitats, we can access some Canadian federal funds. There's some provincial funds in Saskatchewan that we access. So on some of our land acquisition and easements, the leverage can be double this as well, 10 to 1, if we're doing some of those projects. But this is the basic that we commit to Tennessee to do with your dollars. I have 2 project examples. This is just one. Revolving land purchase is something that we've gotten into big time. We see this as a great opportunity to take a dollar and make it go farther. We buy the land, we do the restoration work, and then we sell the land with perpetual conservation easement. That gets more, because basically an easement, once it's all said and done, even using the revolving pot and the cost of time and so on, it's about half price. So you can protect, restore, and protect. And the nice thing about doing it when you own it is you can restore everything that you want to restore. Whereas if you try to do it on someone else's land, there's usually restrictions on maybe not that wetland, or adjusting maybe the seed mixture or whatever. When we own it, we restore it to what we want, and then we sell it with a easement on the entire quarter section. That's the way to do it. It's effective. This one here, the sketch plan shows you this is a very wet quarter. Revolve that one. Now that's protected in perpetuity. Here's another one. We bought this one and kept this one. Ran a purchase, completed in 2016 August. This one had a lot of wetland restorations. All those red wetlands are ones that we put small ditch plugs on. One of our biggest challenges in Prairie Canada is surface drainage for wetland loss. Losing wetlands. Agriculture just sees them as an obstacle, and you can't blame them based on economics. Now, a lot of the economics in agriculture show that you really aren't gaining by farming through those wetlands, but they think they are. So we're better off to try to get some of these back. This one was so good. When you look at that wetland density, you look at how hard it would be to farm that, this is just great waterfowl habitat. When we see something like this, we buy it and keep it forever. So in summary, I have a report that's been submitted to the department, to Jamie and Joe. In summary, we purchased 189 acres, put conservation easements, perpetual conservation easements on 209 acres, protected another 872 acres with agreements either 10 to 30 years. So that's either protecting through our forage program, incidental habitat, or rebuilding wetland projects, which are typically 30-year agreements. We converted another 895 acres of grass, or cultivation to grass, with private landowners. And then we influenced 32,994 acres of grasslands and winter wheat. Those are our extensive programs. That's working with agriculture, giving them the information, the support to do the right thing on their land base. Those are broad programs. We influence them, and it may make a big impact on their land. Almost done already. I have a short video, about 3.5 minutes. Before I get to the video, this is something we're proud of. It's an area that some folks have been to. Director Myers has been to this place. Some of the former commissioners on the second trip were at this location. We've now protected this place with a conservation easement. It's super amazing. I also want to recognize our Jim Couch. He's our chairman of the board for Ducks Unlimited Canada. He's here. He is going to be presenting you all with something tomorrow morning at your commission meeting tomorrow morning, and he's featured heavily in this video. It's a great thing. I'll just play it, and then I have one more wrap-up slide. If it'll play, it showed up last time. Click in here. There we go. Oh, it's coming. Might need some volume.
We're about 6 miles northeast of Viscount, Saskatchewan. We're in the middle of the Prairie Pothole region. Tremendous amount of wetlands in this part of the world. The property is owned by the Young family. They've had this property for well over 100 years.
We have had the farm here since 1905, where my grandfather came and homesteaded here and started the farm out for us. My father carried it on, and I carried it on, and now my son is carrying it on.
The grass that are under your feet were not seeded. They've been here from eternity, and that makes it extremely unique. There's very little of this left in the world today. This is where waterfowl breed. That's why it's so important to us to protect the wetlands. It's a roosting area in the fall for migratory birds. There's a tremendous amount of waterfowl raised in this area adjacent to this lake.
I'm just gonna pause it. It's way out of sync. The video and the audio. Is it running off the USB by chance and not off the computer? Sorry about that.
What I can do here.
Did you have it right on the desktop?
Yeah, it's on the desktop.
I think it's that one, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe right there. If you can. It's only about 3 minutes. Let's see if it catches up this time. Looks like it's lagging.
We're about 6 miles northeast of Viscount, Saskatchewan. We're in the middle of the prairie pothole region. Tremendous amount of wetlands in this part of the world. The property is owned by the Young family. They've had this property for well over 100 years.
We have had the farm here since 1905, where my grandfather.
We're going to try to run this off of USB jump drive instead to see if it'll perform a little bit better for y'all.
Is there any questions for Dave while we're waiting?
I've got one.
Mr.
Here's
Stroud?
my ignorant question number 1,000. How are the potholes, as you're getting this thing up, how are the potholes created? Is there, I know it's a natural thing, but do you know?
Glaciation, right? So the last ice age that came down, basically as it receded, it dropped chunks of ice along with chunks of residue. And as that ice melted, you ended up with this
We
knob
know.
and kettle landscape. Yeah, so it's really the last glaciation, 10,000 years ago. So we're gonna try this one more time. If it doesn't work, we might just skip it. Just seemed like there's a lag for sure. The video is not syncing. Once it gets going. I need to click it. No. Doesn't even want to. Yeah, I'm trying. Do I have to hit project again? Oh, let's go back here. Try it one more time and then we'll just give up if it doesn't work. I hate technology. Videos are great when they work. I'll talk until this kicks in. If it doesn't kick in, I'll just go to the next slide and we'll be done. But basically, the Young Ranch, it's a conservation easement. It protects, it's our second largest conservation easement in the organization, the largest one in Saskatchewan. It is an area that is known to hold well over 10,000 sandhill cranes every fall. We've seen upwards of 10 to 15 whooping cranes on this area. The south side of it is owned by a Young family. The Young family has had this in their family for 3 generations, and they were looking for a way to protect it, and so were we. So we approached them, we offered a conservation easement, protect the habitat right around the lake, as well as a whole bunch of additional habitats south of the lake that had high wetland densities. We've agreed to a price, and we're in the final stages of getting this thing completely locked up on the south half of this wetland. Now, the interest on the north side is growing from other landowners because they've heard these landowners got a check for over $800,000, or they will. But it's gonna protect a pretty special place. Ed remembers being there, I'm sure. And it's one of those things that we can do that makes a difference. It's just an example of an easement that we can do because of your partnership. I'm gonna go on to the last slide and just say thank you. It's your support along with a number of other states. Right now, we have 40 states participating in support of conservation work on the breeding grounds, investing in their waterfowl that come from up in Canada. Those states, a number of them, are now at their AFWA goal. It's a small number so far, but we're pushing to get as many as possible. And we look forward to the future. We think we can continue to do great conservation work. We need to stop wetland loss. That's our number one challenge. Jim can attest to that. That wetland loss is still our biggest issue. We don't have good legislation to stop it on its own. We're fighting, trying to get new legislation in place, and that'll be an uphill battle. But we keep trying, and we're going to make a difference, especially with your help. That's it. I can answer any questions you might have.
Commissioner Olbert?
Dave, I just want to thank you for all the work y'all do. It was truly amazing and really gave me a total different perspective of really what DU actually did. I think there's a lot of misinterpretation, and a lot of people, want the money spent. We want to spend it in Tennessee. Well, if we don't have the good grounds in Canada, I'm afraid we're not going to have any ducks in Tennessee. But it's very interesting that my son just texted me that he killed his first banded duck today. And I'm amazed that when his band, he sent me a picture, 2008, Imperial Beach, Saskatchewan. So you probably know where that is. I have no idea. But that mallard came all the way to Decatur County, Tennessee, on the Tennessee River. So I thought that was very interesting, and would share that with you today. So it's pretty interesting.
I'm a 10-year-old duck. That's an old duck. Yeah. They don't make drake or hen.
It was a drake.
Drake. That's an old drake for sure.
Wow, that's cool. Great story.
He
No, I've seen Jack shoot. He did not have a heart attack.
the band was, it's really worn. You
Yep.
can tell it's even the writing on it's really worn.
Yeah,
So-
sometimes you have to send them in and they actually have to use acid to read them. But yeah, that's pretty cool. Pretty cool. And I mean, we've got the banding return information. I don't know if folks have seen that map, and I've shown it before. Certainly that correlation from Saskatchewan in particular to this state. Saskatchewan is your number one place. That's why when we put a proposal forward, we focus on Saskatchewan. You get ducks from Alberta and Manitoba as well. I mean, if this state wanted their dollars to go to other provinces, certainly we could do that too. But I think your best investment is Saskatchewan. Your highest percentage of banded ducks come from there. It's pretty clear that's your relationship. If you look at just mallards, it's even higher. The proportion of mallards that come out of Saskatchewan as compared to the other species is even higher. So pretty good relationship there.
Mr. Cox?
On duck production, it seems like to me in my weak memory that you need the wet to springs for the duck to have good habitat.
Correct.
You need the rains and all that, but they said that about every 3 or 4 years you need a dry. And I wonder how many years we've had good wet years, and has there been a dry year, and is there a danger of too many wet years, or how?
Well, we can't control it. So we've had tremendous wet conditions, about 15 years. Really, we haven't had a drought since the late 80s. We've had drier conditions in parts of Saskatchewan and parts of the prairies, but we haven't had drought across prairie Canada and the U.S. since the late 80s. So really, we're running a pretty good stint. And when you think about hunters and used to liberal seasons, if we were to see a drought across the prairies of Canada and the U.S. at the same time, you'd have a whole generation of hunters that hadn't seen restrictive seasons. So absolutely, we do need a wet-dry cycle. Typically, it's been a decade, kind of decadal type of thing. Not every 3 or 4 years, but every about 10 years we seem to get wet, real wet, and then the next 10 years it get a little drier. And we've just been wet for a while. Is this something that's going to continue? Who knows? We're quite dry going in this fall. Anybody that was up in Canada this fall saw the ground was cracked. It was very dry in most of prairie Canada. So what that means is no frost seal, which means basically without the moisture in the ground, you don't get a layer of ice that forces the water to run off when it melts in the spring. So when the snow melts, typically if you have a good frost seal, it'll flow off into the wetlands. If you don't, when it melts, it just goes into the ground, which you need to top up water tables, but it means less water in the wetlands. So we're set up, unless we have a really wet spring, to be drier this next year. But I've said that for about 3 years. Jim can attest to that. We think we're going into dry cut, and then we get some rains in the spring, We've been wet, and I'm not complaining about being wet, but the wetlands have degraded. They've been high and deep for quite a while, and it would benefit the landscape, although it would be painful to hunters, because if we went through an extended drought, you'd be in restrictive seasons before long.
What is the net success, survival success?
Wow, I mean, it varies obviously by habitat, but overall, our research has indicated that if we can get 15% nest success, we can have a growing population. So we don't need very high, because most species re-nest. So a mallard will nest 2, 3, 4, they've documented up to 6 times in one season. If they get a successful clutch, that'll be hers for the season. But if she fails on the first nest attempt, she'll try again. And most species will do multiple nests. So that 15% and a clutch size of 10, second nest attempt, or 12, second nest attempt would be 10, third would be 8 or 6. So it gets smaller, so it gets less and less productive. But they've learned how to reproduce. So you don't need to get a real high nest success in order to grow the population. Does that make sense?
Mr. Garner?
Thank you, Chairman. When you come up with this AFWA number, I may have missed it already, and I apologize if I did, but could you say what the AFWA is and how the number's derived?
Absolutely. So the AFWA is Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. So Director Carter, as a director of an agency, is a member of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and your agency is. He represents, on that group of directors, a group of bodies that make decisions about what to put forward, how to get changes to federal legislation, how to work together on things like CWD or whatever, right? So that association is a collective body that works very effectively and is really an example of continental stewardship, because it does include Canadian membership, looking for it to include, and they do talk about a lot of things in the South, in Mexico and Central America, as far as your birds that go there, migratory, neotropical migrants. So that association looked at the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, the North American Wetlands Conservation Act, which you guys should have been informed about by now, NACA. So NACA has a body of dollars. So what AFWA did is they said, in order to meet the need of match for NACA, we need to raise about $10 million a year from state agencies for this. So they took that $10 million and they said, how do we divvy that up among states to set a goal for each state? And they said, let's use hunter numbers and harvest. And so what they did is their first shot at it was in '91. They took 2 decades, 70s and 80s, and they said, what was the average harvest and hunter numbers for each state? And then they just divvied up that 10 million among those states. So Louisiana's goal is almost $1 million a year. Texas' goal is 725,000, and they hit that this year. They actually gave us 725,000 to the breeding grounds. But then a state like, pick one, Idaho, pretty small goal. New Mexico, very, very small goal, but they actually contribute. They just joined last year. So Tennessee's share, Tennessee's share is 166,000 of that 10 million.
Commissioner Cox?
This is not for Dave, but we kind of just flew by Director Myers here just a few minutes ago, and if any of the commission or anybody in the room does not know Gary Myers and what he's accomplished and what he is partially responsible for in the group, and if my memory serves me correctly, the resolution for the North American Waterfowl Management Plan has his signature. So, one of my great pleasures of serving here has been getting to know Gary and talking to him. He is probably the smartest man I've ever seen to talk to, and he's responsible for a lot of what DU is doing with Canada, United States, and Mexico. And if you have an opportunity to sit down and talk to him, you need to take that opportunity, because he's one of the great men in this country when it comes to waterfowl and birds and what do you call them? The dicky birds or the shore birds or whatever nickname you have. So he's a giant in this industry. If you don't know him, you need to sit down and talk to him. I'm glad to see you.
Thank you, Bill. I wanted to recognize Gary too, but you did a much better job than I could have done. So, but thanks for all you did as well. Any other comments from the commission?
I mean, I could talk about Gary for a long time. but-
Oh, sorry.
I had a question. How many billion has been spent right now?
I believe the estimate right now on the North American plan, the whole effort by all three countries in the continent is in 4 billion has been spent on North American plan efforts over the last almost, 30 years. Because 1986 is when it was signed, right? So it's been a long time that we've been working at it. The original plan was 15 million, 1.5 billion, is that right? 15 years, 1.5 billion. That was the original plan, and they thought, okay, if we can get that, we can fix this problem. One of the problems is we didn't pass legislation across the continent. In fact, you guys had legislation in the US federal government that got repealed that was protecting wetlands. So we've continued to lose habitat over that same time period. So it's not that we didn't put the habitat on the ground we said we would do. We got that done, but we lost habitat. And so as we continue to lose habitat, if we can't stop wetland loss through solid legislation and incentives for landowners, it's gonna be tough to ever get to that goal, but we're still working at it. And the investment is getting us birds. We're making a difference in conservation. If we didn't have this plan, you would not have the waterfowl resources you have today, guaranteed, regardless of whether it's wet or not. But we need to stop wetland loss. That's number one.
Other comments? Want to reiterate what, Commissioner?
Dave, you don't mind explaining Gary's plaque up on the breeding range?
I would love to. So we created an award, and we created this award when we were trying to figure out how to recognize Gary when he retired. So Ducks Unlimited Canada knows the depth of what Gary's involvement was in the North American plan. I didn't. I learned that along the way, but the organization did. And so when we were looking to recognize Gary, we wanted to dedicate a project to Gary, and we thought, well, I mean, that's some project out in the middle of nowhere. So we came up with an award called the North American Waterfowl Conservation Honor Roll. And this honor roll is a plaque up on the roof of our building at our headquarters, north of Winnipeg, out by Oakhammock Marsh. And this plaque basically recognizes those individuals in the wildlife resources field, can't be our donors, it's got to be people that worked in the wildlife resources field that made a difference, went above and beyond just doing their job to make a difference in waterfowl conservation in Canada. And so we created that. Gary's name is the first name on there. We've been adding names to it every year over the last, Gary and I figured this out this morning. I went over to Gary's place for coffee this morning and figured out it's been 10 years. 2008 was when Gary retired, and we've been putting names on there every year for 10 years, recognizing other people like directors from other state agencies, US federal government employees, Canadian federal government employees, provincial individuals. So we're adding people to this honor roll, but really the impetus for this honor roll was Gary Myers. This honor roll was this idea that we needed to show and document in history the people that made that difference across this continent. We're proud to do it. Look forward to continuing to add names this year. We haven't done it yet. I think I let out to Gary on a phone call. There's a senator by the name of Senator Mitchell, who is the one that introduced NACA legislation. He will be one of our inductees this next year, along with the staff person that wrote the legislation. So we want to get the right people up there, and Gary set the mark at a pretty high bar.
To reiterate what Commissioner Holbert said, you know, you read about the Prairie Pothole region, you see pictures, but haven't been there and seeing what an incredible place it is, it feels good knowing that's protected. So thanks for what you're doing, and thank you and Jim for coming to give us this presentation.
Thank you very much. Sorry to use way more time, and I do have the video. I can share it with you. It's on YouTube called Forever Young. If you look under Ducks Unlimited, it's an awesome video, and I apologize it didn't work.
Maybe we could see it tomorrow, maybe we'll see if it's
I'll see if I
available.
can fix
Okay.
it for tomorrow.
Great, thank you.